In tonight's news, the Prime Minister lays the foundation stone for Tafila Public Hospital. The United States and other G7 ministers aim to press Russia to end its support to the Syrian president. And Egyptians hold funerals for yesterday's bombing attack victims amid high security. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki laid the foundation stone for the new Tafila Public Hospital during a visit to the Southern Governorate. The 150-bed hospital, to be established at a total cost of 34 million JDs, will contribute to improving health services offered to Tafila citizens. During the ceremony, the Prime Minister said much can be done to achieve development in the Governorate. He added the hospital will contribute to the city's development process, noting that Tafila Technical University will have a key role in training hospital staff. The Senate condemned as an ugly terrorist act the bombing attacks on two churches in Egypt that killed and injured dozens of innocent civilians. The Senate said the goals of the terrorist groups to sow strife and destabilize Egypt will not be realized. Egyptians denounced the deaths of at least 44 people who were killed in yesterday's two church bombing attacks on Palm Sunday. Security guards were on high alert outside the Coptic church in Egypt's Nile Delta city of Tanta. Egyptians held funerals for a number of the victims. More in this report.
An emotional goodbye to the victims of Egypt's Palm Sunday attacks. Mourners grieving for their loved ones as their bodies arrive for a late-night funeral with security tight.
It's a miserable and painful feeling going through this cruel experience. We were not expecting people who live with us in the same country, people who we shared love and friendships with, to do these things.
At least 44 people were killed and dozens injured when two separate ISIS bombs tore through churches in Tanta and Alexandria. Blood-stained benches and a clock stopped at the time of the blast, a reminder of the violence that struck on one of the most important days on the Christian calendar. Egypt's religious minority is increasingly the target of ISIS militants, the country's president now pledging to protect them, declaring a 3-month state of emergency.
Security forces are increasing their efforts to catch the assailants and the criminals and those behind them so they can be punished.
President Sisi has also sent troops onto the streets to help police, a rare move from the former general who's determined to present himself as a leading force in the fight against terrorism in the Middle East.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson met with British Foreign Minister Boris Johnson in a meeting expected to focus on Syria. Earlier in the day, Tillerson said the U.S. would hold responsible anyone who commits crimes against humanity, days after the U.S. military unexpectedly attacked Syria. A number of diplomatic issues will be raised at the meetings, which will also be used to send a clear message to Russia.
The message that we're sending to the Russians is very, very clear. Do they want to stick with a toxic regime? Do they want to be eternally associated with a guy who gasses his own people? Or do they want to work with the Americans and the rest of the G7 and indeed the like-minded countries for a new future for Syria? And that has got to be a political deal. And with the best will in the world, it is the Americans who have changed the game.
Tillerson also met with his French counterpart on the sidelines of the summit. Britain and France had renewed their call for Syria's President Bashar al-Assad to leave office last week and reiterated holding accountable anyone committing crimes against humanity. U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces fighters said they had fully controlled Tabaqa Airport in Raqqa province. They said they hoped the airport would soon be used as a base to target Daesh. The alliance has been battling Daesh militants near the Tabaqa Dam and airbase west of Raqqa in an accelerating campaign to capture the strategic stronghold. Iraqi police fought Daesh to edge closer to Al-Nouri Mosque in western Mosul, tightening their control around the landmark site. Thousands of residents have fled from Daesh-held areas inside Mosul, the militants' biggest remaining stronghold in Iraq. Tens of thousands more are still trapped inside homes, caught in the fighting, shelling and airstrikes as Iraqi forces backed by a US-led coalition advance in the west. Sporadic clashes continued for the fourth consecutive day in the Palestinian Ain al-Hilwa camp in southern Lebanon. Sounds of intermittent fighting and bursts of gunfire were reported after a night of heavy clashes. Medical sources said the toll in the fighting had risen to 8, among them 5 civilians with at least 40 people wounded. Fighting erupted late Friday after Palestinian factions deployed throughout the camp as part of a joint security force aimed at combating the influence of a local extremist group. Foreign ministers from the group of 7 major industrialized nations sat down for talks in Italy, seeking clarity from the United States on a number of issues, especially Syria. The 2-day summit comes as the U.S. moves a Navy strike group near the Korean peninsula amid concerns over North Korea's nuclear ambitions and as the West's relations with Russia struggle to overcome years of mistrust. But the civil war in Syria is expected to dominate talks in the hopes of reaching a final communique that will reinforce UN efforts to end 6 years of conflict. Italy, Germany, France and Britain have invited foreign ministers from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan and Qatar to sit down with the G7 group tomorrow morning to discuss Syria. China and South Korea agreed to slap tougher sanctions on North Korea if it carries out nuclear or long-range missile tests. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy Kim Kyun said there was no mention of any military option in his talks with China's special representative for Korean affairs. Kim added the two sides agreed an even stronger UN resolution will have to be adopted in the event of additional weapons tests by North Korea. This came as a U.S. Navy strike group headed to the region in a show of force, with the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying a response is likely if North Korea poses a danger. Sweden's leaders joined members of the country's emergency services today at a ceremony to remember the victims of the Stockholm truck attack. The Swedish Prime Minister said Britain, Belgium and Sweden had suffered horrendous acts of terrorism, but they had also seen the strength, determination and power of democratic societies. Members of the public lit candles at the scene of the attack in memory of the 4 dead and 15 wounded. The country's police chief, meanwhile, said he remained confident the man held in custody is the truck driver in the attack, adding that it was now up to the prosecutor to prove this in court. Police are holding a 39-year-old Uzbek man believed to be the driver. Malaysia's airport customs seized about $3.1 million worth of rhino horns, which were shipped from Mozambique via Doha on Qatar Airways. Officials said they found 18 pieces of rhino horns weighing 51.5 kilograms. The horns were shipped with false documentation and classified under object of art. The case was still being investigated and no suspects have been arrested or found. Global trade in rhino horn is banned by a UN convention, but in some Asian countries it is prized as an ingredient in traditional medicine. According to the International Rhino Foundation, 29,000 rhinos remain in the wild today, compared to 500,000 at the start of the 20th century. A U.S. astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts made a parachute landing in Kazakhstan, wrapping up a nearly 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station. Seated in the Soyuz capsule were returning Station Commander Shane Kimbrough of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and cosmonauts Sergei Ryzhkov and Andrei Borisenko from Russian space agency Roscosmos. 3 crew members remain aboard the space station, which is a $100 billion research laboratory that flies about 400 kilometers above Earth. In command is NASA's Peggy Whitson, who on April 24th will break the 534-day record for the most time spent in space by a U.S. astronaut.
And touchdown is now.
Spaniard Maverick Vinales continued his perfect start to the MotoGP season yesterday with a victory in Argentina after compatriot and reigning champion Marc Marquez crashed while leading from pole. Some of the world's top track cyclists were training in Hong Kong ahead of the UCI Track Cycling World Championships. The 5-day event starts on Wednesday, and Britain will be the nation to beat after their performances at last year's World Championships in London and the 2016 Olympic Games. Britain finished top of the medal table in London with 5 goals and 9 in total, and they were also the #1 team in Rio with 6 goals and 12 altogether. Elsewhere, the United States and Germany will be hopeful of winning medals with several Olympic and world champion medalists in their squads. And finally, the weather outlook. It will be slightly cold tonight in the hilly areas and the eastern plains. Tomorrow, temperatures will rise with warm weather expected in Amman. It will be warmer in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect a pleasant night and a warm day tomorrow with moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Before we end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister lays the foundation stone for Tafile Public Hospital. The United States and other G7 ministers aim to press Russia to end its support to the Syrian president. And Egyptians hold funerals for yesterday's bombing attack victims amid high security. With this, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Dana Abusham. Thanks for watching and have a good night.